And what is going on, guys? Welcome back to the Pick Swap Media YouTube channel. My name is Sean Barnard, as usual, here with my guy Ryan Coyle, and we're getting close to the best time of the year, Ryan. And you know what that is? That's NBA draft season. So how we doing, man?
Good. Definitely one of the least exciting drafts in recent memory, but I feel like we say this with like NFL too. I feel like out of this draft, we'll definitely find a few guys who are like, wow, why didn't we see that come in from him? It's kind of cool, and I think it also just goes into like your evaluation process more. Are you able to identify some of these guys because there's really not a clear cut number one.
Yeah.
You can make an argument for three or four guys. I think they're at the top. So it's going to be a fun process. A lot of big name like college players are going to go like high in the draft where, and sometimes we've seen those guys kind of slide down the board a little in favor of some more better prospects. But interesting draft this year, and excited to start getting into it. About a month and a half out now.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been a lot of talk about how poor this draft class is. I will say I think it's a little bit overstated. That I think what's missing is those surefire superstars. That it feels like
Mhm.
every player carries a little more risk this year. What I do see in this draft is there's a lot of those nice potential role players. The guys that I do think are going to carve out nice NBA careers, even if they're not going to be this multi-time All-Star or these high accolades, Hall of Fame careers at the end. I think there's a lot of guys that can be very helpful to teams. So I'm excited to dive into it, and I guess we can kick things off with the guy that I think must be the surefire number one pick based on what I've been reading, and that's Bronny James, isn't it, Ryan Coyle? So, what are you seeing? I guess to get the Bronny James conversation out of the way here, do you think this dude belongs entering in this NBA draft this year?
Definitely not. We talked about it yesterday a little bit, where it feels like it's more so what LeBron wants and LeBron's kind of seeking, especially because he's a guy that's going to need minutes and just reps. I mean, I was watching the scrimmages today, and even Woj was saying like this is a guy that barely has played basketball over the past year due to his heart issue, and he kind of just was thrown back in there at USC. Definitely wasn't like 100% in full swing the entire year. But still, in what he showed, still didn't really pop off the page that much. I mean, if his name's not Bronny James, he's not even in the conversation remotely close to being a draft pick. Um, and he's been hyped up as more of like I think look at more of like a combo guard. He's only 6'1", so
Yeah.
he's going to have to probably play the point at the next level as well. And I also love kind of the discourse that Woj was saying, like, oh, this is really going to drive ticket sales and merchandise sales at our G League games. Like that conversation's not going on at all inside a front office. So definitely a polarizing viewing. But I will say in a draft that lacks really like a true superstar freak talent like a Wemby, it's going to be interesting to see where Bronny goes because that's probably going to be the story of the draft.
Yeah, it certainly will be followed from start to finish. And I just want to say, I don't want to paint myself as the anti Bronny James guy because I do think there's a world where this dude does turn into a legitimate NBA player. He's just not there yet. That in fairness to him, had one of the more difficult paths to the pros like ever. When you think about that heart issue, is far more than just a quick brush off conversation. We're talking
Mhm.
about this dude needing legitimate medical attention and there being the possibility that he could not play basketball again. For that to occur and then him not get a preseason and then playing on a team that underperformed from start to finish in USC to the point where the coach resigned at the end of the year. There was a lot of issues with that team beyond just Bronny. And of course, him not getting the even playing from the field from the start, I do think is difficult. So we'll see how things shake out. And with all that being said, I would have no issue with the Sixers pulling the trigger on drafting Bronny James if that means that his dad's coming. So do you think a team plays that card? Is that your expectation?
I think that's definitely going to be in the conversation. I've heard you say over the past couple of days a few times that LeBron doesn't have to pick up that option until after the draft. So that certainly adds another domino effect into it as well. But, Clutch is going to be kind of in the ear, being like,
Oh,
if you
yeah.
think LeBron's coming there, no shot. I do think, though, and back to what you said about a minute ago, where you could see a world where he does become a legitimate NBA player. I still wonder if he has like a potential growth spurt in him. He's still only
Yeah.
19, turns 20. I just looked it up October 6th. His dad is 6'8", 6'9". Does he maybe get a few more inches in him? That certainly changes the topic a little bit because I think the most intriguing thing about him, certainly you can look at his athleticism, but people have really raved about his ability to defend and just kind of that overall basketball IQ. If he goes from 6'1" to 6'4", 6'5", he could become maybe like a lockdown defender and really make himself into an NBA type of player. But it goes back to, does he have that growth spurt in him? And if he doesn't, are his skills really good enough to kind of hang around in the league?
Yeah, and that's all to be determined. I do think that I'm pretty optimistic that that is the case, that he does grow a little bit. He looks like he has the body that's ready to put on a couple more inches at least. And I
Mhm.
mean, I do think defensively is going to be his niche at the NBA level. But regardless, let's shift gears and dive into some of these other draft guys before we get too lost in the Bronny James discourse here. So, Ryan, I know you're a little deeper in kind of the college guys that I'm going to defer to you a lot on that. I do want to kick things off mentioning some of the international talents that, as you mentioned, pretty wide open for how things are going to go in the first handful of picks. I'll say that at this point in time, and this is pretty fluent, but I do think that the Atlanta Hawks, who secured the one pick, should draft Alex Sarr. And to dive into a little bit about who he is, 6'11", 217 pounds, 7'4" wingspan, 19 years old. He spent 2 years with Overtime Elite and then had spent this year playing in Australia. He's an athletic defender. He's switchable. He's a grab and go guy that's going to get boards and push it down the other end. Some of his transition numbers were pretty absurd. 1.51 points per possession in transition. I do believe that there's kind of a little bit of a Bam Adebayo, Jonathan Isaac type of style to his game, even a little bit of Jaren Jackson Jr. That's sort of the mold that I see from him. And I know that big man isn't necessarily like the biggest need for the Hawks, that's with Onyeka Nkongwu and Clint Capella already holding things down there, that they're pretty balanced. But I do think Sarr is a little stylistic difference there that could bring something to this team. And I'm kind of curious from your perspective with the Hawks conversation as a whole, what do you do here? Like, what is your
Mhm.
outlook for the franchise? Are you picking for a guy to add to the Trae Young and DeJounte Murray core? Are you picking to rebuild, find a guy to start from scratch? What's your mindset, and do you have any thoughts on Sarr?
Yeah, that's kind of where I wanted to go with it. Like, what do the Hawks do? Like, do they sit here and pick and try and make something of the Trey Young? I think the Hawks are definitely one of the more fascinating teams this offseason because they could completely blow it up. You know, get Capella off the books, get Trey Young, DeJounte Murray out, bring in Sarr and give him kind of the keys to the team in the front court. But is he even worth that? Is he worthy of blowing everything else up? Because we have seen the Hawks at times. It just feels like they haven't been like fully healthy and just fully constructed at all at one point yet. So, Trey Young to the Lakers buzz that's been a little bit of some noise this all season. I think if you trade Trey Young, you're not going to really do much with Dejounte kind of as your lead guy. So, the Hawks sitting there at one. Is there anybody that really wants to come up and even get that number one overall pick too? Like, there's a lot of dominoes to go. So it's definitely going to make for an interesting draft night because I think this is the first time or since I don't even know when, maybe Anthony Bennett, that we're actually going into the night where we might not actually know who the pick is like a few weeks out. So Sar, as you were saying, I'm not as up to date on the international guys. I usually save that for a few weeks prior to the draft and focus more so on the college guys because that's what I know more. But the talent's there, the frame's there, but is that a fit there in the front court with Atlanta? I just don't think that is right now. So I think the Hawks are going to try and do everything possible to get out of that number one spot, especially if they keep Trey Young and try to build around him. I think they need some more guys on the wing there.
Yeah, for sure. And for what it's worth, I was listening to a little bit of the Bill Simmons and Ryan Russillo podcast, who were saying that from their talks with some of the general managers around the league, that kind of the going rate for what the number one pick is valued at by front offices is like a fourth or fifth starter this year, which is
Hmm.
pretty crazy when you think about some of the packages that we've seen for that type of movement. And I will say, as far as the not knowing the top pick, we did get a little bit of pump fake in the Paolo Banchero, Jabari Smith season that
Yeah,
was
that's true.
a little surprising there. But to your point about the Hawks kind of picking for fit, I do think that wing is obviously the greatest need. And to make the case for a guy, I have not heard a lot of noise about Ron Holland, who's a G League Ignite guy. I'm far higher than him than I believe the perception of his. I might end up landing on him, my belief that he should be the number one overall pick. Average 22 points per game, 7.5 rebounds, 3.3 assists, 2.6 steals per game. I think defensively is going to be his niche as well. That he is a guy that I think at least is switchable 1 through 4, possibly 1 through 5 when all things are shaken out. The 3-point percentage is going to be his biggest swing skill, that he is a guy that's under 30%. But I'll say both Ron Holland and Matas Buzelis, who are the two G League Ignite guys, I'm far higher on than I think the consensus. And I think Buzelis is another guy that I want to pump up, that I'm ready to stamp him as one of my guys, that there is a little bit of dog in him that kind of jumps off the page for me. I have watched a couple Ignite games from start to finish this year, not as much as probably some of these college guys that we're going to get into, but to make the case for Buzelis as well, he's 6'11". He's just under 20 years old, 14.3 points per game, 6.4 rebounds, a 1.1 block, 1.9 assists. A guy that is a little more polished on the offensive end than I would say Holland, that I think Holland's more of that kind of natural defender. But Buzelis is a guy that I do think is everything that you're looking for in modern basketball, that he is a guy that can grab and go. His finishing around the rim is kind of weird to me. The lay up the numbers, I can't find it in my numbers. He's very Franz Wagner kind of in this, but a lot of his struggles to finish around the rim for me feel like an out of control issue, not like a touch issue, which I will take. I think that's something they can fix. So any thoughts on any of the Ignite guys? And then I got one more international before we can dive into the college waters.
Yeah, so I know something that, I mean, I feel like it kind of gets lost in the media, at least like once a season really starts. But I know front offices really value this, and you see it in the draft. Like the guy that kind of sticks out to me is like Zaire Williams from Stanford a few years ago. Had a disappointing year at Stanford, but still went like number 8 because he was a top 5, top 10 recruit. A lot of the front offices value that. They'll value kind of that track record from high school and like the EYBL and that pedigree rather than like one down year at a college that might not have been a great fit for you. When you look at Ron Holland, he was the number 2 commit or the number 2 prospect in ESPN's class last year, and Buzelis was 5. So these are 2 top 5 guys. And I think Buzelis was him and a guy that we'll probably touch on a little bit later, Justin Edwards. I saw those 2 guys' names the most at the top of the draft, like the player rankings and mock drafts at the beginning of the year. So Buzelis being 6'11", he's a guy that I actually have seen, whether it's just some clips. I did watch one of the G League Ignite games, but I kind of like his playmaking at that size a little bit. Like you said, he's kind of got that swagger to him a little bit. And if the Hawks do sit there and pick at number 1 overall, I think that's kind of a good fit. Jalen Johnson took a big jump this year. You slide him more of like the 4. Buzelis, DeJounte Murray, Trae Young, that's a pretty good trio of playmakers right there. I think you're gonna have to surround them with some more shooting, obviously, but that's a pretty exciting at least lineup. I think it kind of gives me like Pacers vibes a little bit, where I think that they could be a fun kind of up and down team.
Yeah, and I do think that in general that people are leaning more into this across NBA circles of having that fast pace, the positionless, pushing the tempo, and really just fun basketball to watch. I do think the Hawks that is the outlook. You probably take that direction. And for Buzelis specifically, I know it's just an exhibition game, but he participated in that Rising Stars game this year during NBA weekend, and it's everything that like I want to see from a guy in that he was competitive. He did have like as far as they're playing to the whatever the rule is where it finishes as a point, he was taking the I want this bucket kind of shots, which was cool to me. So that was something that left a little bit of an impression on me. The last guy that I'll just bring up, Zachary Richier, is I believe how you say this guy's name, from France, 6'8", 202 pounds, 19 years old, 6'10" wingspan. This is a guy that I do believe is going to be a high level shooter, that the shot looks like it translates for me, and the numbers are absolutely there. Shot 58.8% on a true shooting standpoint, 40.7% from 3 on 3.5 attempts per game. Now, the biggest concern here is he did take a massive leap this year, that he shot just 34.3% from 3 and 65% at the free throw line in the year prior, and then obviously leaped towards the 40.7% this year. So there is concern that this is a bit of an outlier, but I am a believer that I think to stamp the best shooter in the draft, I think this guy gives Reed Sheppard a little bit of a run for his money.
Yeah, and the thing I guess you could definitely lean with there if you believe that he's a better shooter than Reed Sheppard. The 6'9" frame, probably a better overall athlete, more length as well than the 6'3", 187-pound Reed Sheppard. So, like I was saying at the beginning, the international guys I still got to dive into a little bit more, but I'll definitely take your word on it that the shooting's there. I do find those kind of things interesting though with the shooting. I think that was one of the things with Scoot Henderson where he shot it really well the one year, then he didn't shoot it well the other. I'm interested to see kind of how that correlates over his career. But a guy like your guy here from France, that's going to be his biggest swing skill. It sounds like coming into this draft as well.
Yeah, and just to put a bow on a couple of these guys, it is interesting to me like the pathway, and we know that G League Ignite has kind of been closed, that will not be continuing moving forward. I think a lot of people were underwhelmed with how the lack of preparedness that we kind of saw from these guys, and it is disappointing to me because all of these kind of success stories from the G League Ignite, Scoot Henderson, Jalen Green, Jonathan Kuminga, these are all guys that it's taken some time for them to be ready for the NBA level. The Jalen Green specifically, I think it was just this year that we really saw him turn a corner. I was very impressed with him through the final weeks of the season, but that was the first time that I saw a guy that I believed could possibly be a franchise type cornerstone player. Scoot Henderson, very up and down year to the point where he spent some time back in the G League. Jonathan Kuminga, like more or less was a nothing for the first couple years and just seemed to have found his stride. So I do think that's scaring teams a little bit when it comes to the Ron Holland and Buzelis conversation. And do you think that's fair to hold against them or something that teams should overlook?
Yeah, it is. It is kind of weird because, like you were saying, when they go to G League Night or Overtime Elite, it was you're going there to play basketball. You're going there
Right.
to learn how to be a professional. And like you're saying, the learning curve a little bit, but it's also like the overall kind of structure. Like they were, I'm not saying playing glorified pickup, but they were kind of just like, we're here just to basically improve our draft stock. That's really what they were going out there for. Whether the G League Ignite won by 30, lost by 30, won 4 games in the season, lost 4 games in the season, however many games they played, they weren't really there for overall kind of team aspects. So I think you got to kind of take that into account too, especially for a guy like Jalen Green, where it was just like, all right, I'm just going to go score. Scoot Henderson, a little bit of the same. Kaminga, even he was really kind of hyped up throughout high school in the EYBL.
Yeah.
He's been, I think, for the most part, a disappointment for where he was. If he was able to, have his game at a different level, the Warriors season, and maybe even this off season would be kind of a different discussion whether to keep that core intact. But yeah, the G League Ignite has been a little bit of a failure, I would say so far, definitely in terms of getting these guys ready for playing in the NBA at the next year.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I am disappointed that ultimately has been shut down and that we will not see moving forward, but it wasn't quite producing at the level that I think a lot of people expected. So let's dive into some of these college guys, and I want to start right at the top with the national champion. Is Donovan Clingan the best player in college basketball or the best NBA draft prospect from college basketball?
I think so. I think he's mine. My kind of overall take on this draft is I think for this one, I'm not taking the swing for the fence. I think I'm going to play it safe and try and get the most surefire thing. And with Donovan Clingan, I know what I'm getting. I'm getting a guy that runs the floor. He plays hard. He protects the rim. He rebounds the ball. And he's shown, I think, an improvement in kind of in his outside shot. I saw some clips from him at the combine yesterday, and even a few times during this year. He showed the ability to, whether or not he was making it was in question, but whether he was able or willing to shoot the ball, and it looks pretty solid as well. So if he's a guy that at 7'2", 265 pounds, runs the floor well, can be a lob threat, has a decent low post game that definitely needs to get worked on a little bit, but protects the rim, and if he can find a way to step out and shoot the ball at a consistent 30 to 35% rate, I think he's going to be a really solid player. I tweeted it earlier. If you're able to get him maybe at number 4 for the Spurs and pair Donovan Clingan with Victor Wembanyama, that's going to be a very hard front court to score on night in and night out in the NBA. So I think that would be a really ideal landing spot for him there at number 4 to the Spurs. And I think his best ball is still ahead of him. But even if he doesn't get any better, you're still going to get a really solid NBA center that I think can be a starter for the next decade.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at, but he's the most sure bet in this draft. And to lay out specifically for this year, 13 points per game, 7.4 rebounds, 1.5 assists, which I do think is a little intriguing there, 2.5 blocks. We haven't seen the three-point shot pretty much at all from him in an actual game setting. That's something that I do think he's going to have to adjust to at the NBA level. That's something that is just the way the world as it pertains to NBA basketball at this point, that everyone has to be able to shoot to some extent. We'll bring up a little bit of that conversation with Zach Edey as well. But with Clingan, I do think that he carves out an identity that at the worst, this guy's going to be a starting caliber center for the foreseeable future, that you're not going to get an absolute bust in this dude, which I think you're rolling the dice a little bit with some of these international guys that we haven't seen, or it's tough to quantify the level of talent they're going against. I know I texted you last night, but I watched Tiger Campbell going head to head with my guy, Zachary Richier from France, which warms my heart because I love Tiger Campbell. But the point being, that's not quite a guy that has carved out an NBA niche by any means. So with Clingan, he was a guy that was playing at the highest level, winning back-to-back national championships, stuck 2 years at UConn. And I know you've brought this up before, but the fact that Dan Hurley talks about him as highly as he does is something that I do think is relevant.
Yeah, for sure. I left that part out as well, but I mean, the fact that he was a two-time national champion, and I think he could have gone to the draft last year too, if he wanted to. He probably would have been a back end of the first round, but just coming back another year of seasoning under his belt, certainly going to play himself into a top 10 pick. I think, excuse me, I think worthy of even a top 5. He might even go number 2 to the Wizards. I think, looking at their front court, they don't really have anyone that makes me want to be holding back. there. I think they definitely the Wizards need a lot to put it
Yeah.
simple. But if you're going to be picking up there and you're like, all right, maybe we can plug some more holes in free agency or something, or go out on the trade market. We can get a rock solid center here at number 2. I think that's definitely going to be worth a look for them as well.
Yeah. Now let's stay with UConn real quick and talk a little bit about Stephon Castle. A bit of an interesting one here that you can see the archetype, you can see the appeal, but to be perfectly honest, I was pretty underwhelmed watching him a ton this year. And I think that had more to do with how talented UConn was than anything about Castle specifically. That straight up, I think if you just directly removed Castle from that roster, they still probably win the national championship. And it is interesting that we're now talking to this guy as a surefire lottery, potential top 10 pick. So what's your feeling for where Castle will hear his name called, and what's your belief in him at the NBA level?
Yeah, so I think Stephon Castle's a guy that kind of fit perfectly for UConn. And as you said, if he went somewhere else, I don't know, just off the top of my head, like a Texas or like a Michigan, like a school like that where they're getting 5 stars and they're kind of just like throwing you in the lineup and letting you be the guy, I think his name would probably have a little bit more buzz. But I
Yeah.
mean, he was the 5th, 6th scoring option on that national championship team. I've been hearing some arguments that you should even look at him at number 1 because, like Klingon, you're getting a pretty safe bet for at least what you think you're going to get from him, and that's athleticism, that's defense, and that's some playmaking as well. Definitely needs to continue to work on his shot. He's another guy where I think if he went back to UConn maybe for one more year, he could have played himself into like a top 5 pick, being like the guy there because he was behind Tristan Newton, he was behind Cam Spencer. He's got the athleticism, like you said, the archetype to be kind of a playmaking 2-way type of guard. But I'm not really seeing the number 1 overall pick type buzz either out of him. Definitely needs to continue to work on his shot, but he's another winning player and a guy too where with Hurley, like he was a McDonald's 5-star recruit. Like this guy could have gone anywhere and probably been the man at basically any other school that he wanted to. Instead, he went to UConn. He bought into his role, and he won a national championship. And I think that says a lot about him. And I think Hurley's going to go to bat for him if teams ask. And I think he's going to be a guy that interviews well and really lights up these teams with kind of just the way that he fits an overall squad.
Yeah, it's interesting. The 26.7% 3-point shooting is for sure my biggest concern, and that's going to be a swing skill that if you can't shoot at a greater rate at the NBA level, you will not stick. Now, we've seen plenty of guys improve their shot at a pretty rapid rate. Frankly, everyone gets better as a shooter when they get to the NBA because that is mandatory, and the amount of shots that you're putting up, the amount of looks that you're going to be forced to take from a practice setting, all these things. Do you think there's any sort of mechanical concerns with his shot, or is this something that as he reps out that he's just going to get better?
My take is on a lot of these super athletic guys, and I feel like every year in the draft we say it was like their jump shot's going to be what makes or breaks it for them in the league. So many of these guys haven't had to use a jump shot their entire career because they're just so much bigger, faster, stronger, and athletic than anyone, and they can just dominate going to the rim. It might have even been just a thing where at UConn too, he's not asked to shoot threes. When you got Alex Caravan, when you got Cam Spencer, he's probably not even taking that many a game. I don't know if you mentioned that or not, how many attempts he had per game.
2.2.
Yeah, so I mean, he's not really shooting all that many threes a game either. And it's a thing too where Hurley's probably like just focus on getting downhill, getting to the rim. A guy that I hope he's not thrown into a position too where he's like, all right, you got to go out there and be a guy for us. That's what we're expecting you out of a top 5 pick because he needs some seasoning on some of his skills as well. So I think the jump shot has a chance, but as you mentioned, that'll probably be what his ceiling is. But I still think his floor as an overall player is going to be a really solid guy going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a fair take. That I do think he is still a pretty sure thing in that, like, he has a lot of the supplementary skills that you look like, that he's not going to kill you by any means. So, haven't fully landed on how high I'm ranking Castle, but has a guy that I would say I entered the offseason as a dude that I'm pretty out on and have kind of opened up my mind a little bit more towards him. So, we'll see where things ultimately settle there. To shift gears and hop over to the Kentucky Wildcats, I'm going to throw this to you a little open ended. Who should be the first Kentucky Wildcat drafted in this draft?
So I said it at the beginning, and I guess I'll stick with it here that I think in this draft, you got to play it safe. And I think Reed Shepherd is more of a safe pick in this draft than Dillingham. And I love Dillingham. I think from the beginning of the year, he reminded me a lot of Maxey. I don't think he's going to be quite the player as Tyrese Maxey, but in spurts, he was one of the more fun guys to watch and really reminds me of when Maxey can go on those runs where it's like, all right, I bet on Maxi's over points tonight, and he's only got 4 in the second quarter. You look up at halftime, and he's got 20. Like, he
Yeah.
could go on those spurts and on those runs. Rob Dillingham at times, though, kind of needs to reel it in a little bit. And if he's not out there getting buckets at a high level, what does he really contribute elsewhere? Reed Shepherd, on the other hand, he's obviously going to be looked at differently because he's a 6'3" white guard, and he's not the most athletic, but 42-inch vertical at the combine. But when you watch him like drive and stuff, sometimes he's not like a very explosive athlete. Sure, he can leap and stuff, but what he does outside of kind of just the overall offensive scope, where he jumps passing lanes at an elite level, really understands the game well, just plays it super smart. I feel like these are all those savvy kind of buzzwords for a white kind of undersized guard, but at the same time, he fits the description. And when he shoots 52% from three, that's something that can't be looked off of. Just an overall elite shooter. I think the best shooter in this draft, and I think he brings to you more than just offense, which Rob Dillingham at this point, I think he's just an offensive player, better overall scorer at this rate. But Reed Shepherd's defense, his playmaking, his ability to be an overall pure point guard, another guy, I think that would fit great with that young Spurs team. I'm excited and really bullish about him going forward, and definitely think it was the right decision to come out because I don't think his stock will be much higher than it is this year.
Yeah, definitely agree with you on that point, that I do think it was the right decision for Reed to come out. To touch on Dillingham a little bit, for starters, I'm in agreement with you that I think Shepherd is the better NBA prospect and the guy that should hear his name called higher. For Dillingham specifically, to throw another Kentucky comparison here, but he's very Emmanuel Quickly like to me, that there is that same kind of joy that they play with, that ability to score in spurts. I think defensively is going to be pretty much a make or break for him. He's a little smaller than I would like him to be. And I even think, like, to Maxi's credit, even when he was at Kentucky, like, he still had a little bit of a bulldog in him defensively. I didn't really see that from Dillingham at all this year. But
very, very scrawny. Like
yeah,
it's like noticeable on film too. I don't really know how much like noticeable it is in terms of like actual play style, but when you look at him, you're like, wow, he's frail. He needs to definitely put on weight.
yeah, definitely. And it is a surefire bet to roll with a Kentucky guard here. But I did want to dig in on Reed Shepherd a little bit. So to list off his stats, 12.5 points, 4.5 assists, 2.5 steals per game. As you mentioned, 52.1% from beyond the three-point arc on 4.4 attempts per game and 53.6% from the field overall. The steals, I think, are a little misleading here. That I think the book of Reed Shepherd is that he's a true 3-and-D guy. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think that he is. That I think he's very much a gambler on the defensive side of the ball. And there's pros and cons to that I'm not going to hold a guy down to the fire. But personally, I have the preference where I would much prefer a guy to dig in, slide his feet, and actually play defense rather than going for the poke outs and trying to jump passing lanes in a way that Shepherd does quite a bit. So I think his defensive reputation is a little more inflated than it should be. But I guess my question here is, I'm seeing some legitimate Reed Shepherd buzz in the top 5. Do you think there's a world where that actually happens?
Yeah, and he's a guy that if I'm the Spurs and I'm looking to get a playmaking guard to, I think the great thing about Shepherd too is like he knows he's going to know his role. Like he's not going to come in there and be like, I'm top 5 pick, I'm the man. He's going to do exactly what he needs to do, and that he's that type of player. And I think like with Wemby there, like that, like what you were saying, he's like a calculated gambler type. If he's jumping passing lanes, you got Wemby behind you to
Sure.
protect the rim. So it's like in a draft like this, where if you're the Spurs, you have arguably the next face of the entire NBA. I think you're doing everything you can to shore up any holes on that roster and just be like, this guy is going to carry us. He's going to be our LeBron, our Giannis, basically. We're going to live and die with him. We need to make sure we have certain things around him. And if Wemby's getting all this defensive attention, you got a guy that's able to shoot close to 50% from three, maybe at the NBA level there, and Reed Shepherd. I think that's definitely a pick that's got to be in consideration for them. And he's going to be able to run the team as well. And I think he's a good enough playmaker where he's going to be able to get Wemby the ball in spots and around the rim. It's not that hard with him, but he's going to be able to do it.
Yeah, interesting there. So, yeah, we'll see where that shakes out. The next guy that I wanted to dig in a little bit here, we're looking over at Baylor with Jacoby Walter. So, freshman, 6'5", 180 pounds, average 16.2 points per game. I believe these are per 36 stats, that I'm looking at here on Tankathon. But 16.2 points per game, 4.9 rebounds, 1.6 assists. What's your feel on Jacoby Walter?
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit before. I actually had stars next to 15 guys. We've hit on all of them so far. Jacoby Walter is one of the next guys I have a star next to. I'm a big fan of his game, a really good shooter. Another guy with Dillingham, though, where noticeably frail, especially at 6'5". He's going to have to put on some more pounds to be able to play the wing and go against some of these bigger guards. But I think he's another guy with his best ball ahead of him. I think if I'm going to take a swing on one of these college guys that in the top 5 or top 6 that you might not be completely sold on, he might be it, just because I think he's got a lot of potential still to grow into. A pretty solid rebounder too, 4.5 boards per game as a shooting guard. Those are pretty solid numbers. And he was on a Baylor team as well. Had 3 or 4 guys, senior veteran-led team ahead of him that were kind of being counted on in the scoring column a little bit more than him. So player where maybe if he went to Colorado instead and he was the man like some of these other guys, if he went to a different school like USC, like Isaiah Collier, and kind of just was given a long leash and just kind of go do what you want and not playing more of a refined system in the Big 12 like Baylor, he might have had a better overall year. But I think one of the best shooters, you can put him in there in the argument, and another guy that has that kind of flamethrower type approach where he could get hot in a hurry.
Yeah, and we got DJ Hammer chiming in here saying Jacoby's one of the guys I'd love for us to look at for number 16. Do you think there's a world where he drops that low and the Sixers have a chance at him?
I don't think so, because he's another guy where I was talking about with like Zaire Williams, the pedigree. I think the pedigree gets him drafted in the top 10 probably. He was the number 8 overall prospect last year, coming out of high school. So he's a guy that is going to be high on draft boards, I think. And it's not like he had a bad freshman year, 14.5 points, 4.4 rebounds. I think his shooting wasn't as great, but he can get hot and he has that kind of shooting touch. So I think he's a guy that's going to go into the top 10. Wouldn't be surprised if he was top 6, top 7 either.
Yeah, and you mentioned the volume. 6.3 3-point attempts per game is a lot for the college level, and he did shoot just 34.1% on those, which isn't as great as you would hope. His field goal percentage as a whole, just 37.6% from the field. I think a lot of that was Baylor looked at him to be the guy to an extent where he just kind of had to generate his own offense in a way that I don't think was probably the best for his development. You kind of touched on that a little bit there, but still a guy that will be interesting to see where he fully lands. A guy that I like quite a bit as well.
What's a Baylor guard? Sorry, from last year, his name's escaping me. That played for the Jazz this year.
Kendall Brown. Are you thinking?
No, from Baylor last year. Name's escaping me, but he had a nice rookie year. He was a guy I was super high on in the draft last year. Wound up having a pretty solid rookie year. I think Jacoby Walter could be like a guy like that, where kind of getting out of Baylor's system is better for him. I want to say his last name was George.
Oh, Keontae George. Yes.
Keontae George. Yeah.
Okay. He did end up having a pretty nice year and looked pretty solid. So maybe he slides on that pathway. You did mention Isaiah Collier when speaking about this. Is he a guy with a star next to his name on your board there?
No, but definitely a guy that is still intriguing. He was the number 1 recruit last year. His shooting was the concern kind of coming into college, and I think leaving college as well. But he's a guy too, I think, that's going to not necessarily like appeal just because of this, but I think it was definitely a noteworthy thing that he was out with a hamstring injury and a hand injury in the season. He could have just packed it up, gone and trained and called it quits at USC for a team that wasn't going anywhere. He came back and he played super well over the second half of the year when it seemed like he was fully healthy. And he's got a crazy build. We talked about a couple guys in Walter and Dillingham that are frail. Isaiah Collier, 6'4", 205. That's near NFL running back, linebacker type of frame. And he averaged 16.3 points per game. 4.3 assists as well, but on a very disappointing USC team. USC had, Elite 8, Final 4 aspirations coming into the year. Just another team that never really was able to fully get it going at times. But Collier is a guy that I don't think necessarily is going to be a lottery pick, but a guy maybe middle to the back half of the first round. I think he can be a solid NBA player, but as always with most of these guys, his shooting is really going to be that swing skill.
Yeah, I've seen him mocked to the Sixers at 16, and I'll say I'm pretty out on Isaiah Collier. That you mentioned the pedigree, a guy that was the number 1 recruit, to rip off his stats again: 16.3 points per game, 4.3 assists, 1.5 steals, had 3.3 turnovers per game, which I do think is a lot there. Shot 49% from the field overall, just 33.8% from beyond the 3-point arc. The biggest thing that jumped out to me when watching him is it felt like he was constantly out of control, that he reminded me a lot of like year 1 Jaden Ivey, to where you're relying so heavily on your athleticism, just attacking the rim at such a fast paced and rapid rate that you're just out of control a lot. And the numbers look good. He certainly had his moments where he shined, but I do have some concerns for what is his true fit as far as an on ball guard, an off ball guard. Is he good enough as a floor spacer, as a guy not to have the ball in his hands? And I am concerned if he can find a true niche for what his role is at the NBA level.
Yep, that's one of the biggest things with not only the NBA draft but the NFL draft as well. The team that you go to and the overall fit is half of your. If you're not, LeBron James or Zion or Wembanyama, your fit and where you go really depends on about 50% of most likely your success rate. If he goes to a place that's like, all right, we're going to be a running gun, getting up and down the floor, shooting threes a bunch team, probably not going to succeed. I think he's a player that could benefit from going to a team with a more veteran point guard and kind of being the second unit guy, learning from a true veteran. Because like you said, he could be a little bit out of control at times, but we talked about it with Castle. So many of these guys are used to just overpowering everyone with their speed and athleticism. It's an adjustment for them. And Collier is probably a guy that body wise he's ready for the NBA, but
Yep.
overall kind of play style and skill wise, I still think has a little bit of time to go. So another player where hopefully he's not really thrown into the fire right away could definitely benefit from playing in the G League too as well.
Yeah, I would agree on all fronts there. And to shift gears to a guy that I don't think will have any trouble finding his role at the NBA level, the guy who I believe is the oldest player in that draft, and that is Dalton Connect. So a guy who certainly brought his name into center stage throughout that NCAA tournament, a guy who is likely the best, I wouldn't say likely the best pure shooter, but a guy who, in a combination of volume and efficiency, Dalton Connect's about as good as it gets. So what's your thoughts on Connect? Where do you see him potentially going in this draft? And are you a believer in him at the NBA level?
Yeah, so he's already 23, so I think that's going to scare some teams off. But another player for like the Spurs, if you're going to surround Wembanyama with some shooters, that's certainly a good player to do so. 21.7 points per game this year. I think Reed Shepard's probably a better overall kind of pure shooter, but like a shooter that's able to shoot off different kind of scenarios, whether it's screens or whatnot, because Tennessee ran that offense through him, and a guy coming from Northern Colorado, for them that much faith in him in the SEC, and he led them to a SEC regular season championship. He made kind of Tennessee basketball fun after Tennessee basketball was more of a let's play it in the 60s and win with our defense. They had a lot of faith in him. So I really like him as an overall player. Definitely a guy that would benefit from going to a win now type of team. He's a guy that like I could definitely see on like that Knicks squad where the Knicks that we saw at the beginning of the playoffs that was for the most part fully healthy, but like he's a guy that I could just see running off screens and hitting dagger threes on people and being whether it's in a starting unit, the closing unit, coming off the bench, another guy that I think is just going to fit his role and do it best. And also I think he's a guy that is kind of where we talked about with Isaiah Collier. He's kind of the opposite. I think he's kind of fit. He could go to any team and just be a shooter, and people are going to be able to run action and get shots for him. So Connect's a prospect I like. I don't know if he's going to be looked upon that high already at 23. Will be turning 24 during the season next year, but one of my favorite players in college basketball to watch last year, and definitely watched a lot of them.
Yeah, definitely. And a very cool trajectory for the dude, too, that he spent 2 years playing JUCO, then transferred to Northern Colorado, averaged 20.2 points per game in his final season at Northern Colorado, and then increased that scoring output with Tennessee, 21.7 points per game, 4.9 rebounds, 1.8 assists, shot 39.7% from beyond the arc on 6.5 three-point attempts per game, 49.9% overall. This is a guy who's very much on my Sixers big board of a target at 16 that I would absolutely take. A guy that I think in day one can step in and play a legitimate role, and completely with you, as you mentioned, that he can fit on any team in today's NBA. The movement shooting is especially what stood out to me in his game, and that is what I think is a little different about him when looking at projecting these shooters is you can run him off pin downs, run him off screens, and that's efficient offense right now. That's JJ Redick type stuff that I think you can do with Dalton Connect right away. So I would love to see him in a Sixers uniform and think wherever he lands is going to benefit pretty heavily.
And another guy that's a pretty good athlete too. Like several highlights of him this year, throwing down dunks. Like he's got ups as well. So don't let his frame, I guess, deceive you. He's a guy that isn't just a pure shooter. He can make some plays athletically as well and hold his own on the athletic end in the NBA. Not as good or not as athletic, I think, as Dante DiVincenzo is, but maybe play like a similar type role where I could see some games where he goes out there and has 25 to 30 points just because he's unconscious from three one night.
Yeah, absolutely. And to shift gears a little bit here, another bit of a mystery man as it comes to this is Cody Williams. That I think there were some high expectations for him. I've seen his name bounced around as the potential top college pick for a lot of the season, kind of faded off towards the end. It was a weird season in Colorado, kind of an odd spot for him, I think, in general. What did you think of Cody Williams' year, and how do you think he projects at the NBA level?
Yeah, I would say out of these kind of top freshmen, he's a guy that I'm more so staying away from. Not a huge fan of his overall game. And I was watching some clips of him earlier today shooting. I don't really believe in the shot as well either. I think that definitely has some room to grow. 6'8", 185. So you have a pretty nice, intriguing frame there. But a guy that needs a lot of work. And my kind of testament for this draft was more so play it safe. I think he's a major risk, especially if you're going to be taking him in the top 5 to top 10. He's the type of draft pick that I think could get you fired. I'll be honest with that one. Cody Williams is the guy that could completely fall flat on his face and be out of the league in 3 to 4 years if he doesn't pan out. I'm just worried about him, and I don't really think he does that many other things well. If he's not really being able to score the ball at a high clip. I mean, only 3 rebounds at 6'8", 1.6 assists. He doesn't impact the game in that many ways. I don't really see the overall type of buzz with him. And another team with Colorado where they did wind up having a winning. I think they won a game in the tournament, but they had some success down the second half of the season. Where was that kind of all year? It still feels like that Colorado team was supposed to achieve a lot more. But Cody Williams is a guy that I think I'm out on for this draft as of right now.
Yeah, that's interesting because that was the guy that me and Mark Henry Jr. have been going head to head on. That Mark Henry Jr. is all in on, and I don't quite see it. That for Cody Williams specifically, the number one thing that jumped out to me every time I watched him play, it feels like his processing of the game is just a bit too slow. That it feels like the game moves at a quicker pace than he reads it, and that's only going to be maximized when you get to the NBA level. That things are only getting quicker. I'm with you that I think he's a very theoretical player to an extent. Now, to acknowledge something here, Jalen Williams is his brother, who's an excellent NBA player, a guy that I think's a surefire all-star, possibly a future all-NBA type player. I think he's getting to be that level of good very quickly, although he's been a little disappointing throughout this playoff run, but he is still very young. Now, Jalen Williams is probably one of my bigger draft misses that I was pretty out on Jalen Williams specifically. And my concern there being him coming from Santa Clara, watching his game and how ball dominant he needed to be, that I was skeptical. Can you find an NBA role with this being the way that you play? And it turns out he's just straight up good enough to do that. Now, to like contrast that with Cody Williams here, I don't know if he has his identity as a player, that it feels like it's a little bit different from him on a game-to-game basis for what you're getting from him. I don't think that's a good trait. And frankly, when speaking about Colorado, a guy like Tristan Da Silva popped off the screen for me far more than Cody Williams for just about every time that we watched him.
Yeah, but when you look at, I think what if that's a conversation inside an NBA front office, De Silva 23 years old, Williams 18. Like, are we gonna, especially where you're picking them in the draft, are we gonna kind of bank on Williams maybe being as good, if not better, than De Silva 3 4 years down the line? Or are we just going to take De Silva? De Silva is a guy that, another player go to the Sixers and just be an impact kind of wing there off the bench. Where if they took a Cody Williams, he's probably not playing much, especially for a team that's in win now mode. So once again, the draft is so crazy because it's so much determining about your fit and where you wind up, that really kind of determines what your career is going to be made of. Because Cody Williams, another player that gets thrown to a team that needs scoring and needs playmaking right away. Just say the Wizards fall in love with him and take him at number 2. I think that's a spot where he's destined to go and fail.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And DJ Hammer chiming in again saying, I think a team like Utah can afford to go for Cody Williams and slowly develop him. Agree there, that I think he's a player that you're taking for what he can be, not what he is right now. That ultimately may be the right bet in the long haul, but I think it absolutely has to be the right situation there. So will be interesting to see where he ends up. Let's slide over to the Duke Blue Devils here. I'll start with Jared McCain. I love Jared McCain, probably one of the more fun players to watch, a guy that I certainly have circled on my board for the Sixers at 16. What's your thoughts on him this season and how he projects at the NBA level?
A little weird for his age as only a freshman. He's 20. He's already 20 years old. So that's something you don't usually see that often. But knockdown, fire type of shooter, like flamethrower type guy.
Yep.
Not the greatest playmaker. I don't think he's going to be asked to do that much in the NBA. But 6'3", like you're kind of in that middle ground where are you a point guard? Are you a two guard? Only 1.9 assists per game, but Jeremy Roach was the point guard there, so maybe he has more some playmaking in his bag that we didn't really get to see to a full extent. But a guy where when he's hot, the rim's not the net's not moving. He's not
Yeah.
even hitting the rim. Like it's insane the type of runs that he was able to go on. I mean, that James Madison game in the NCAA tournament, six at the most. I think he hit 6 threes in the first half, and that game was over at halftime just because of how hot his shooting was. So guy that can definitely catch fire and has that skill set that makes you say, okay, he is going to be able to do something for me in the NBA from day one. Does he develop some more things to his game? 5 rebounds as a 6'3" guard, pretty impressive numbers there. But I'm a McCain fan as well, and another guy that I would really like to see find his way to Philadelphia if they do stick and pick there at number 16.
Yeah, I was going to highlight those rebounding numbers as well because that is pretty high. 5 rebounds per 6'3" guard is pretty impressive stuff to me. And you mentioned the shooting, 41.4% on 5.8 3-point attempts per game. That's really good stuff there. Shot 46.2% from the field overall, 14.3 points per game. And he's a guy that is fun to watch, that he can just get it going. He's got that energy, that passion that I to me does mean something. I like when guys look like they love playing basketball. Like we see it with Tyrese Maxey, and Maxey specifically has opened my eyes a little bit that there is a joy that comes with it. I think Jared McCain has a lot of similar traits there. And I do think that in the long run, like that matters from a team construct, that matters from guys wanting to play from you, and matters from guys just like being likable to an extent that you want on a team. So I like Jared McCain. To me, that would be a slam dunk pick if he lasts to 16. Do you think he, what would you say the range is? Do you think he's likely there or goes early?
I think he'll probably wind up being a lottery guy in this draft too. Like if you get a guy that you know is going to be able to shoot it that well, another safe type of pick, I think that's going to be too appealing to pass up probably in the top 14.
Yeah, I definitely see a world where that happens. To shift gears and stay with this Duke team, Kyle Filipowski is a guy that I'm a bit surprised that we're even talking about in this draft. That I did expect him to enter last year. I thought he was going to be a one and done guy. Did improve most of his numbers. His rebounding did go down from 9 per game last year to 8.3 this season. His scoring went from 15.1 to 16.4. Showed a little bit of growth as a shot blocker, going from 0.7 as a freshman to 1.5 this year. Improved as a shooter, shot 34.8% from beyond the 3-point arc on 3.1 attempts per game, shot just 28.2% as a freshman, as well as from the field, 50.5% compared to 44.1% as a freshman. What do you think on Filipowski as far as how he projects positionally at the NBA level and where you think he sees his name called come draft night?
Yeah, Filipowski is an interesting watch because he's a guy that I watched in person in high school, so I've been able to see him play quite a bunch of times. The thing that stuck out to me the most in high school, and I think we saw it in college as well, his ability to grab and go off the glass, I think, is really impressive. I think we're seeing more and more of that in the NBA, where if you're able to, as a forward, just get the ball and go and facilitate the offense off the rip. I know he's not going to be facilitating the offense all the time, but just kind of like what Jokic does, where if Jokic is able to grab a rebound and just bring it up, and he's good enough playmaker, passer that he can do that. That's an attractive trait. He can shoot the ball well. I think the one knock on him is that he's soft at times, but he also, I think, does have a little bit of an edge to him as well that we have seen at times too. So Filipowski is a guy that I don't believe has a super high ceiling, but I think he's a guy that could stick around, play very valuable minutes in the league, and a player that I think would actually be a pretty intriguing fit next to Joel Embiid potentially if they do sit and pick their number 16, just because he does have that floor spacing ability. He's not really going to clog up the paint, and a guy too that I think could slide in and maybe even play some backup five if needed as well.
Yeah, I like what you said there. I've been itching for a stretch four next to Joel Embiid for years. He's a little bit like Lauri Markkanen light to me. He's certainly not quite the level of player that Lauri is, who's already been an all-star and 25-point per game scorer, all these things. I don't think we ever quite get that from Kyle Filipowski, but he is a guy that I still think will carve out a niche for himself at the NBA level, and a dude that I think I'm higher on than the perception. That I've seen some mocks with him dropping in the 20s, and I think he's more talented than that. I think he does deserve to hear his name called a bit sooner from that, so would not be against him as the selection at 16 for the Sixers if they do end up sticking there.
Yeah, especially in this draft too, where it's like I think that there's no reason that he should fall into the 20s. Like he's a good enough player, and we've seen it over a 2 year time where it's I know where I'm going to get some valuable basketball minutes from him, and I'm not completely taking a swing on a guy that is really unproven, like some of these other guys we talked about, like Cody Williams, where sure we've seen it in spurts, but Kyle Filipowski, I know he's going to be a solid player. He might not be an overall all-star, but if you have a chance to pick him there in between 15 to 20, I think he's a guy that is worth a hard look in the mirror because he's going to be a guy that kind of is not like a job saver, but a pick that a GM could turn back to and be like, that was a good overall draft pick by me.
Yeah, totally agree there. And let's head back down to Baylor for another guy here, which is Yves Missy, who's a guy that I don't have a strong feel on, and I'm excited to get your thoughts on. I've seen some wild highlight reel blocks cut pop across my timeline from this guy. I'll also point out he's from the same hometown of Joel Embiid, which is Yaoundé, Cameroon. Throughout the season, averaged 10.7 points per game, 1.5 blocks, 5.6 rebounds, shot 61.4% from the field, did not attempt a shot from beyond the three-point arc. What do you think of Missy? Where do you think he hears his name called in this draft?
Not much of an offensive threat at this point in time. A pretty solid rebounder, but definitely most notably known for his shot blocking. And he's got that NBA frame already, 6'10", 235. I won't have any doubts that he could hold his own on the block in the league. Does he have more of an offensive game to tap into? That remains to be seen. But another guy where Baylor always depends on their veteran guys so much more than their youth. Does he kind of come out of his cage a little bit more once he's out of this Baylor system and he's free a little bit? That's going to be a big thing for him. Does he have more of an offensive game? I haven't really seen it yet, but is he going to maybe be like a Derek Lively type where he shoots close to 70% from the field, blocks shots, and rebounds the ball off the bench? Sure, I could see that, but he's not a guy that I'm doing backflips and cartwheels for and banging the table for in this draft.
Fair enough. And I do think the Derek Lively comp's pretty fair. That's kind of the category of player I have him lumped into, sort of cut from the Clint Capella type mold, that type of thing. I'm not out on him by any means. He's a guy that I'm excited to dive deeper in, but didn't pop to me the way I think I would have hoped when watching Baylor when I did this season. So we don't got to go too in-depth on him there. A guy I hate when we have to have these types of discussions, but Terrence Shannon Jr., there is a little asterisk next to the legality things. I believe things are cleared up, that I know he returned to play this year. That obviously is the overarching thing, that if he is serving some criminal time or a situation like that, that's certainly the concern. So we'll just wipe that to the side and act like that is not the case, because I will approach this from the basketball perspective and let that work itself out. As a basketball player, I love this dude. I think he's awesome. I think he plays hard. Love the body that he has, the way that he attacks the rim. What do you think of Terrence Shannon Jr. and how he projects at the NBA level?
Yeah, so it actually came out, I think, last week. He is going to trial for these accusations. So that's definitely going to be something that I don't know when that'll be settled, because, you're probably not going to take somebody in the draft if there's a chance that they wind up going to jail
Right.
and the seriousness of that situation. But if you're just looking at pure basketball wise, was one of the more fun players to watch this year in college basketball, just from a pure scoring perspective. 23 points per game, and especially in the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament, he really went off and showed the ability to kind of put the team on his back. A guy that's not going to be afraid of the moment. He's one of my guys, Sean, where I've talked about him over the past couple of years, where it's like, all right, it's a Tuesday night in January, our lead guard's out, go out there and play 35 minutes. Wouldn't be surprised if he had 30 points in a game, like a Cam Thomas type of player in that regard. He's a bucket getter. That's pure, plain and simple. But as you were saying at the beginning, there's some bigger issues probably at hand that if I had to bank on it, I don't think he'll get drafted. I think he's going to be most likely a pickup. Maybe sign him on like a two-way where somebody's not using draft capital on him with his status really unknown.
Yeah, that's completely fair, and we'll let the bigger picture stuff work itself out there. But 8.6 free throw attempts per game, the rate that he attacks the basket is some really good stuff. So hopefully, whatever the justice is here works itself out, and we won't go too much deeper on him. I did want to ask you about Devin Carter here, Providence. He's a guy that I've seen mocked to the Sixers a decent bit. There seems to be a growing movement for Devin Carter to be a target for this Sixers team. From my eyes, looking like one of the more athletic players in the draft. Plays with a really fun motor. Talk to me a little bit more about Devin Carter.
Super fun watch. His athleticism definitely pops off the chart. when you watch him play. And also, I was seeing on Twitter at the combine, he really lit it up and really impressed people in his testing and his numbers. Only 6'3". When you watch him, he looks like he plays like more like a 6'5", 6'6".
He had 8.7 rebounds per game.
Yeah, and 3.6 assists too, 19.7 points. Another guy that's a little bit older, 22 years old already, but Devin Carter was one of the more fun players to watch in college basketball this year. I remember he had a pretty crazy windmill dunk to really kind of cap off a game earlier in the season. And he really took over. I mean, Hopkins went down with a torn ACL there at Providence, and he really put the team on his back. That was a team in Providence that I think should have made the tournament by season's end. I think they kind of got robbed at the end there by like a Virginia, but super fun guy to watch, and I think his best basketball could be ahead of him. I think he's going to be an awesome role player in the NBA, and he's a guy that I hate to say it, but I feel like is like a future player for like the Heat. Like he just kind of fits that type where he might not really get that much playing time year 1, year 2 or something, but I could see when one or two of those guys go out the door and sign a bigger deal, he goes in, he has his one or two big years, and then he plays himself into a big deal. Just plays super hard, super fun to watch, and definitely one of my favorite players in this draft.
Yeah, I could absolutely see that, and I do not want that energy in the university ends up in Miami because I personally love this guy. I think there's a real chance that this ends up my favorite player for these Sixers. We got DJ Hammer agreeing with us as well, saying I'm very high on Devin Carter too at 16 for us. Gives me White/Smart vibe. So Marcus Smart and Derek White. I think those are pretty good comparisons there. I even think there's like a little bit like of a junkyard bulldog kind of mentality, more closer to the Marcus Smart side of things, but he seems a little bit like a more like high IQ player than that. Marcus Smart has improved in that category for sure, but that was a huge concern for his for a long period of time. So yeah, I think there's a real chance that I land on Carter as my preference for that 16 pick. But we'll keep it moving a little bit here. Tristan De Silva I touched on from the Colorado conversation. I like him a lot, and I think that he's going to project as a better NBA player than people are giving him credit. He's a guy that is a dark horse in the running for me at 16 as well. Do you think that is too high to take Tristan De Silva?
I think it might be a little too high. I think he's a guy that's going to probably fall to the back end of round one. But to spin off that Colorado conversation, I like another guy a little bit more. KJ Simpson. I didn't watch Colorado all that much this year, just being a West Coast team, but was watching some of the NBA combine scrimmages today, and he had a really good show. And I think he scored in double figures, but he was picking up at half court. He was to what you said a couple minutes ago, that junkyard dog type mentality. Like he will guard you. He will be that kind of Jose Alvarado, that Javon Carter type guy where you need a spark plug off the bench. Hell, even a TJ McConnell type. Almost averaged 20 points a game this year as a junior. A bit undersized. I think he's going to need to shoot the ball a little bit better, but as a 6'2 guard, 19.7 points, 5.8 rebounds, and 4.9 assists. That's a pretty intriguing kind of stat line right there for a guy that's not really the most athletically gifted and the best size. So KJ Simpson's a guy that I'm definitely looking to be one of those players that probably is going to go in round 2, but we're going to look back in a few years and say he's one of the 15 to 20 best players that come out of this draft.
Interesting. I'm going to have to dig in a little bit more on him. And by the way, we're not even touching the best player on Colorado, which is, of course, Eddie Lampkin, who's just electric to watch here. Not
that
a guy
was
that
in
I
Syracuse.
think, yeah, dude, that man's on like year 8 of college, I swear.
Yeah.
But shout out Eddie Lampkin there. Talk to me about Johnny Furphy here, because that's a guy that I don't think I see it in, and I'm seeing a little bit of a lot of love. We got Mr. Rudy Poo chiming in saying too many little guys, no thanks. Johnny Furphy, talk to me about him.
Furphy's a interesting case where it seems like, I mean, he still hasn't fully declared yet, so there is still a chance that he comes back to Kansas. It sounds like it's about a 98% chance that he goes to Kansas if he goes to the draft. If he returns to Kansas, they are going to be unanimously the number 1 team. Pops off the page a little bit more athletically than you would think. He has some kind of Christian Brown type of moments where it's like, oh wow, I didn't know he had that in him. Not overall great statistics this year. I'm not really seeing the overall type of buzz. You see it in spurts, maybe like that Cody Williams type where I see it. I could eventually see it happening more, but I didn't see it all that much this year. So he's a player that I guess left me wanting a little bit more, but wasn't really expected much out of him in his freshman year, and he was kind of thrown into a bigger role there by some injuries at Kansas. So Furphy's a guy that I think could definitely use another year of college, but it doesn't sound like he's going to be going that route.
Yeah, interesting. And yeah, he's not a guy that I'm entirely out on, but I think for some of the mock drafts I've looked at and some of the conversations, he's significantly higher than I personally believe is the case. So a guy that I'm certainly not interested in around 16. And I think he's more of like kind of a 25-ish range, in my opinion, at this point. But we'll see where that ultimately lands out. Mr. Rudy Poo chiming in with a guy that's speaking a little bit more of my language, and that is Deron Holmes. That is a guy that excites me quite a bit. Averaged 20.4 points per game this year, 8.5 rebounds, 2.6 assists. Shot 38.6% from beyond the arc on 2.5 attempts per game. How much do you like Deron Holmes, Ryan?
I don't know if it's because another player that I saw in person, but I feel like that actually like goes a lot into like my overall view of players. Like when you actually can see what they do, how much ground they cover. I watched Dayton play St. Joe's this year, and he was everywhere. I mean, all over, catching lobs, blocking shots. He can go out on the perimeter and guard. He can do a little bit of everything, and he shot it really well at the combine yesterday too. So if he's able to add an outside element to his game, by all means, continue, because I think he's got a bright future ahead. Another guy that I think needs to put on some weight, but 20-8 this year he averaged. And a guy that kind of fits the same mold is another center I like in this draft, Coyle Ware at Indiana. You can argue he's a top 5 talent in this draft. He might even be a better overall kind of player in 5 years down the line than Donovan Clingan, but his motor is the major concern for him, whether he wants to turn it on and play hard or not. Averaged almost 15 and 10 this year. If he plays to his full capability, he's a guy that could be a long-time starter in the NBA, but his motor has been a major concern for him through 2 years and that kind of up and down nature. So a guy that might be a little bit too immature at this rate, but if you're going to take a stab on someone at the beginning of the second round, end of the first, Khalil Ware is a guy I like, and right there with Holmes as well.
Interesting. So if you had to rank those two, because I've seen Khalil Ware in some conversation with the Sixers as well, where would you put Holmes versus Ware?
I'd probably put Holmes above just because I think he's a little safer at this
Yeah.
rate, and I don't think the overall talent gap is that big. I think Khalil Ware is more talented. He had the fastest, I believe, at least from the big man, the 3/4 court sprint yesterday at the combine. So he's a guy that athletically he's got all the tools, but I know what I'm going to be getting out of Deron Holmes without kind of the head case nature of the fact. So I would probably go Holmes over Ware in that scenario.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I prefer Holmes by a pretty significant gap, but I do want to dive deeper into Ware to that point. We danced around Zach Edey a little bit here. That I saw a little bit, or I saw a Bleacher Report update saying that teams do believe he's a lottery talent, despite some skepticism. My mind has changed a decent bit on Zach Edey this year specifically. That coming into the season, I thought there was no world in which he can survive at the NBA level. After this year, I kind of think that there's a chance that he can. He's certainly going to be a different stylistic player than really anything in the league right now. Do you think there's a place for Zach Edey at the NBA?
I do, and from what I was seeing from reporters at the combine yesterday, buzz around kind of GMs and executives there was they really like the way that he moved and those agility drills, and it seems like that's certainly something that's improving. And my biggest thing with Zach Edey, it's like he came. I mean, I know he's 7'4". He obviously has that working for him, but he came to Purdue as kind of an unheralded recruit, and he's
Yeah.
only gotten better. He's one of the best college basketball, not only big men, but I think overall players of all time. A
Oh
two-time
yeah.
National Player of the Year, averaged 25 and 12. He's given you no reason to believe that he can't continue to improve and get better. He's never going to be a flat-out all-star, game-changing type of center, but if he could have like a Zubac type career where he just goes in there, he gets you double doubles basically every night, and he's just a solid rotational kind of center. I'm not putting that out of the question at all because he's given me no reason to believe that he can't continue to get better and improve on some of these weaknesses. And I know it was standstill, uncontested shooting, but his 3-pointer was looking kind of solid yesterday. If he can add that element to his game as well, that's just another tool. So he's a guy that I'm betting on and I'm rooting for too. I feel like he got way too much unnecessary hate just for being so large. And he's given me no reason to believe that he can't continue to improve and be a viable NBA player one day.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. And one something that opened my eyes at least was that Nick Nurse spoke really highly of him from him coaching him at Team Canada. That Nurse having a chance to work with him a day in and day out. That he's not this big softy. He's a guy that is competitive, plays hard, wants to win, and I think that's all really important. I mean, we're talking about a dude that averaged 25.2 points and 12.2 rebounds this year, along with 2.2 blocks. He there's gonna be situations where he struggles. If you get him in space, he's not gonna hang, these type of things. You're gonna have to make adjustments and find a way. But I do think the skill set is there. If I had to pin you down and ask right now, where do you think he does get drafted?
Don't have the order. Here's the order. I mean, definitely in the first round. I
Okay.
don't see a scenario that he falls out. I'm gonna be interested. You might be able to get access to these numbers in Jersey with being able to bet on the draft, but I'd be interested to see on like DraftKings what his over under number is for the draft because I do think he's a first round pick. And in this draft, once again, I feel like I know what I'm getting with Zach Edey. I know I'm going to get a guy that is able to score down low and rebound the ball. Worst case scenario, he's not gonna be great on defense probably at least right away, but I know I'm going to be able to get a couple of skill sets. Worst comes to worst, guy that fights for rebounds in the paint. And in a draft of a bunch of unknowns, I'll take two kind of skills there. And you're not really finding many 7'4" dudes rolling out of bed, so that's hard to come by as well. You can't teach height. That's what basketball coaches kind of said to me growing up. That's something that always sticks with me too.
Yeah, no number on DraftKings Sports right now. They do have Alex Starr has moved up to minus 210 to be the first pick, which I do think is
Yeah.
interesting. And also they have Bronny James over under 39.5 draft selections, minus 180 for over 39.5. Any
Do the
thoughts on
Lakers have pick 40?
that's I actually don't know. That's a good question. And they do not. It is the Portland Trailblazers. So interesting there. But yeah, nothing on Zach Edey at this point in time. Is there
Do the
any other
Lakers
guy?
even have a pick?
I believe so. Yeah, they pick. It's a good
55.
question. Yeah, 55. So maybe that number should be set at 54 and a half if
Yeah.
I was an odds maker there. And DJ Hammer, first off, shout out Nick for saying I think Zach Edey will be the ideal backup center for every team. I wouldn't go that far that I do think that there are limitations. You got to play a certain style to make sure they can. Like he would not work on this Pacers team, for example. But there's certainly a situation which he's usable. And then DJ Hammer chiming in saying, I think Edey will get drafted whenever after pick 10 if a team needs or has no backup big. Yeah, I do think he's more of a sure thing than people are giving him credit. He simply might be too big to fail. And Mr. Rudy Boo saying pick 41, I believe, referring to the Sixers there. Yep. So we'll see what all of that shakes out. Are there any other guys that you want to kind of harp on, Ryan?
None that I'll go like deep into, but my last few kind of guys that I had stars next to their name. Harrison Ingram.
Okay.
He's a guy that is still considering going back to North Carolina, I believe, but after leaving Stanford, another guy a high pedigree was a McDonald's All American. Had a really nice year at UNC this year. Shot the ball a lot better. He's a guy that I think could have a nice NBA career. Alex Caravan. It sounded more and more like he's going to go. I think he's got that shooting skill set. Athletically wise, I don't really know. Watching him in the scrimmages a little bit today, he didn't look that athletic compared to some of these guys, but 6'8", 210, can shoot the ball. There's going to be a spot for him. Justin Edwards on Tankathon's big board, he's all the way down at 46. Another player that was number one overall projection in a lot of mocks going into the season. I'm going to take a risk on him if I can get him in the second round because he showed in spurts what kind of player he could be. But I think a guy that could definitely use some more time, especially getting reps in the G League. And then Tristan Newton and Cam Spencer, winning players. I'm going to at least maybe take a flyer on them on a two-way deal. And then Jamal Shed is a guy that I'm going to go to bat for. It seems like time and time again, every reporter, analyst, guy that covers college basketball, all they did was rave about Jamal Shed. That was a Final Four team if he stayed in. He was the heart and soul, the glue of that team. 12.9 points, 3.7 rebounds, 6.3 assists. Just a flat-out stud point guard, a guy that I just have no doubt in my mind is just going to find a spot in this league and a way to stick. Is he going to be a superstar player? Probably not, but he just has too many intangibles and is just too much of a coach's player not to find a spot in this league. So Jamal Shed is a guy I'm definitely going to be going to bat for.
Interesting. I like all those names. I like Jamal Shed a lot. The last guy that I'll throw in the mix here, Bub Carrington from Pittsburgh. I like a ton as well. So that's gonna be my last one that I'll throw out for my kind of my guys list. But we will be diving much deeper into this draft class as it gets closer. We'll be ripping out some videos, kind of ranking some guards, looking at some more Sixers specific, but did want to give a little bit of an intro today. So appreciate everyone for tuning in. Ryan, any last words or anything that you got going on that you want to highlight?
No, yeah, just definitely keep it locked here. I think we're going to be busy over the next 6 weeks or so, and then we're doing a little draft watch along as well. So that'll be fun. I think this is going to be a pretty crazy draft where we don't really know much going into it, and that's kind of the best overall draft.
Yeah, definitely. And a couple last minute comments that I do want to touch on. For starters, Mr. Rudy Poo, Nikola Topic, I am in on that. I do like his game. I like the pace that he plays with. This guy that excites me and I think should be in the number one conversation. And I think he is potentially that good. I still haven't landed on where I'm kind of ranking a lot of these international guys. Again, Matas Buzelis, I like quite a bit as well. A guy that I'm pretty high on. And then to jump on to DJ Hammer here, yo, can we talk about the other Ryan, but from Virginia? I have so much stock in him. You think his ridiculous defensive abilities will translate to the NBA level? So this, of course, referring to Ryan Dunn from Virginia, who is definitely one of the more interesting prospects in this draft. Any thoughts on him, Ryan Coyle?
Not much of an offensive game now.
Yeah,
Another guy where he was
like
like a
zero.
late bloomer in high school too. He's like from the Long Island area, and then he came down to the Philly area, went to the Perkiomen school, and did like a prep year as well. So a late bloomer, I think, basketball wise, where Virginia might not have even been like a suitable spot for him offensively. At least he probably could have benefited from being more of a mid major player. But yeah, he's going to need to show a little bit more on the offensive side. But the defense and the frames there, like 6'8", a solid 200 pounds or so. He's got stuff to work with, but yeah, going to need to see more. But Virginia is a team too that they might have even been just holding his offensive abilities back.
Yeah, he's a little Matisse Thybulle like to me. But we'll see. I'm not off my board by any means. I do overall like him, but haven't fully landed for where to place him. And I did not see that Nikola Topic got hurt. So shout out to you, Mr. Rudy Poo. Yeah, not
Yeah,
good
hurt his
timing.
knee. He hurt his knee. I think yesterday or 2 days ago, but it said that he avoided any major thing, so he should be good over these next couple weeks.
Okay, that's good to hear at least. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting stretch to see some of these guys' names move. Feels like there's just about as much variance as I've seen at the NBA draft at this point. So we will keep it locked and stay on top of it all. Once again, appreciate you guys for tuning in, and we'll be back throughout the rest of the draft streams. Talk to you next time right here on Pick Swap Media.